London, 1847. The carriage wheels rattled against the cobblestones of Grosvenor Square as Lady Augusta Blackwell stared out at the rain-slicked streets of London. Gaslights flickered through the evening mist, illuminating the grand townhouses that lined the fashionable district. Augusta adjusted her black gloves, a gesture that had become habitual in the 2 years since her husband's passing. At 23, she was far too young to have resigned herself to perpetual mourning, yet the thought of rejoining society filled her with unutterable dread. "We have arrived, Your Grace," announced Fletcher, her loyal coachman, as the carriage came to a halt before Pembroke House. "Perhaps we might circle the square once more," Augusta suggested, her voice barely audible over the sound of nearby musicians tuning their instruments. Fletcher's weathered face appeared at the carriage door. "With respect, Your Grace, Lady Catherine would be most disappointed if you failed to appear. She has gone to great lengths to secure your attendance." Augusta sighed. Her cousin Catherine had indeed been relentless in her campaign to draw Augusta back into society. Widowhood was no excuse for becoming a recluse, Catherine had insisted, particularly when one possessed youth, beauty, and a substantial fortune. "Very well," Augusta conceded, accepting Fletcher's hand as she descended from the carriage. Her emerald gown, the first coloured garment she had worn since donning widow's weeds, caught the lamplight as she moved toward the entrance. Though still subdued compared to the vibrant peacockery of the season, the deep green was a concession to Catherine's pleas that she begin her gradual return to society. The footman at the door bowed deeply. "Lady Augusta Blackwell, Duchess of Westmoreland," he announced as she crossed the threshold. Conversation faltered momentarily as heads turned to observe her entrance. Augusta felt her cheeks warm under the scrutiny of countless eyes, many of which she had not met in over 2 years. "Augusta, my dear," Catherine Pembroke, Countess of Hartfield, swept forward, resplendent in ivory, silk and pearls. "How wonderful to see you at last. I was beginning to fear you had turned into a spectre, haunting that dreary estate of yours in Hampshire." "Hadley Manor is hardly dreary," Augusta replied, accepting her cousin's embrace with a small smile. "It is peaceful." "Peace is for the elderly and the infirm," Catherine declared, linking her arm through Augusta's. "You, my dear, need life, and perhaps," she added with a meaningful glance around the glittering assembly, "someone to share it with." Augusta stiffened. "Catherine, you promised—" "I promised not to arrange matches," her cousin interrupted. "I said nothing about allowing nature to take its course. Now come, there are many who wish to renew their acquaintance with you." As Catherine led her through the throng, Augusta nodded politely to familiar faces, responding to condolences and pleasantries with practiced composure. The ballroom glowed with the light of 1,000 candles, reflecting off crystal chandeliers and the jewels adorning the necks of London's elite. "Lady Augusta, what a delight to see you again," remarked Lady Winthrop, an elderly dowager whose sharp eyes missed nothing. "We had begun to wonder if you would ever emerge from seclusion." "I have been occupied with estate matters," Augusta replied evenly. "Yes, I imagine managing Westmoreland's properties must be quite the challenge for a young woman," Lady Winthrop observed, her tone suggesting she found the notion questionable. "Though I understand your late husband's solicitors handle most affairs." Before Augusta could respond, a sudden hush fell over the assembly. The music, which had been building toward the opening dance, faltered momentarily. "Well," Lady Winthrop breathed, her rheumy eyes widening. "It seems the evening has become decidedly more interesting." Augusta turned to follow the collective gaze of the room. A tall figure stood in the entrance, his severe black evening attire emphasizing rather than diminishing his commanding presence. Even from a distance she could discern the hard line of his jaw, the uncompromising set of his shoulders. "The Duke of Shadowmere," Catherine whispered, her fingers tightening on Augusta's arm. "Alexander Cavendish. I did not expect him to attend." Augusta had heard the name, of course. Even in her seclusion, rumors of the feared Duke had reached her ears. His first wife's mysterious death, his ruthless business acumen, his icy demeanor that kept even the most determined social climbers at bay. "They say he has not attended a ball since his wife's passing 3 years ago," Lady Winthrop murmured, clearly relishing the drama of the moment. "One wonders what has drawn him here tonight." As if sensing her scrutiny, the Duke's gaze swept the room, eventually settling on Augusta. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, their eyes locked across the crowded ballroom. Something in his expression, A flicker of recognition, perhaps, or mere curiosity, caused Augusta's heart to quicken inexplicably. Then the Duke was moving, cutting through the crowd with purposeful strides. People parted before him like water before the prow of a ship, conversations dying as he passed. "Goodness," Catherine whispered. "He appears to be coming this way." Augusta felt rooted to the spot, unable to move as the imposing figure approached. He stopped before her, and Augusta was struck by the intensity of his eyes, grey as a winter storm, and just as forbidding. "Lady Augusta Blackwell," he said, his voice deep and smooth as aged brandy. It was not a question. Augusta curtsied slightly. "Your Grace, I believe the first waltz is about to begin," he stated, extending his hand. "Would you do me the honor?" A collective gasp rippled through their immediate vicinity. The Duke of Shadowmere rarely danced, and never with young widows of no particular social standing beyond their inherited titles. Catherine's fingers dug into Augusta's arm in warning, but something in the Duke's unwavering gaze compelled her forward. "I would be delighted, Your Grace," Augusta heard herself say, placing her gloved hand in his. As he led her to the center of the ballroom, Augusta felt dozens of eyes following their progress, could almost hear the furious whispers behind fans and gloved hands. The orchestra struck up the opening notes of the waltz, and the Duke's hand settled at her waist, firm yet respectful. "You are trembling," he observed quietly, as they began to move in perfect time to the music. "Forgive me," Augusta replied, striving for composure. "It has been some time since I danced." 2 years, I believe," he said, guiding her through a turn with effortless grace. "Since before your husband's passing." Augusta looked up in surprise. "You are well informed, Your Grace." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I make it my business to be well informed, Lady Augusta, particularly about matters and people that interest me." The implication sent a flutter of alarm through her chest. "And do I interest you, sir? I cannot imagine why. We have never been introduced." "Until now," he corrected. "As for why," his gaze seemed to penetrate beyond her carefully constructed facade. "Perhaps I recognize a kindred spirit." "In what way?" "Someone who wears their solitude like armor," he replied, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Who finds safety in isolation?" Augusta missed a step, momentarily thrown by his perception. The Duke adjusted seamlessly, his hand tightening slightly at her waist to steady her. "Careful," he murmured. "We are being watched." Indeed, as they circled the floor, Augusta became acutely aware of the attention they had attracted. Even other dancers seemed to give them a wide berth, as though the Duke carried some contagion they feared to catch. "You must know your reputation precedes you," Augusta said, finding her courage. "People speak of you in whispers." "And what do they whisper, Lady Augusta?" There was something dangerous in his tone now. A challenge. "That you are to be feared," she answered honestly. "That misfortune befalls those who cross you." His expression remained impassive, but something flickered in the depths of his eyes. "And does that frighten you?" Augusta considered her answer carefully. "I have faced my share of misfortune already, Your Grace. I find I have little left to fear." For the first time, genuine surprise registered on his face, quickly replaced by what might have been respect. "Then we are indeed kindred spirits," he said as the music drew to a close. They stood motionless for a moment as the last notes faded. Then, with perfect correctness, the Duke bowed over her hand. "Thank you for the dance, Lady Augusta." "The pleasure was mine, Your Grace," she replied automatically. He studied her face for a moment longer. "I wonder," he said quietly, "if you would consider calling on my sister, Lady Eleanor, tomorrow afternoon. She hosts a small gathering for tea at Shadowmere House. She has few female acquaintances, and would welcome your company, I believe." The invitation was so unexpected that Augusta found herself nodding before she had fully considered the implications. Yes, I would be pleased to make her acquaintance." "Excellent, until tomorrow then." With a final bow, he released her hand and walked away, leaving Augusta standing alone in the center of the ballroom, acutely aware of the curious and, in some cases, hostile gazes fixed upon her. Catherine was at her side in an instant. "Augusta, what were you thinking?" she hissed. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Augusta watched the Duke's retreating figure, a curious sensation settling in her chest, something between trepidation and anticipation. "I believe," she said slowly, "I have just waltzed with the devil." "Worse," Catherine replied grimly. You've caught his interest. Heaven help you now." But as Augusta turned back to her cousin, she found herself wondering if perhaps she needed no heavenly intervention. For the first time in 2 years, she felt truly alive, her heart racing not with fear, but with something far more dangerous: curiosity. The following afternoon found Augusta's carriage rolling to a stop before Shadowmere House, an imposing mansion of grey stone that seemed to frown upon Berkeley Square. Unlike the warm, welcoming facades of neighbouring houses, the Duke's London residence presented a forbidding countenance to the world, its windows like watchful eyes regarding passers-by with suspicion. "I shall return in 2 hours, Your Grace," Fletcher said, as he helped Augusta descend from the carriage. His weathered face betrayed concern. "Unless you wish me to wait," Augusta squared her shoulders, adjusting her dove-grey visiting dress. "That won't be necessary, Fletcher. Lady Eleanor is expecting me." The door swung open before she could knock, revealing a silver-haired butler whose dignity seemed etched into the very lines of his face. "Lady Augusta Blackwell," she announced herself. The butler bowed. "We have been expecting you, Your Grace. I am Harrington. Please follow me." The interior of Shadowmere House was surprisingly light, with high ceilings and large windows that admitted the afternoon sun. The décor, while undeniably masculine, possessed an elegance that spoke of refined taste rather than ostentation. Harrington led her through a grand entrance hall and down a corridor lined with portraits, stern-faced men and women who bore the unmistakable Cavendish features: strong jaw, high cheekbones, and those penetrating grey eyes. They arrived at a set of double doors, which Harrington opened with a flourish. "Lady Augusta Blackwell, Your Ladyship," he announced. The drawing-room beyond was a revelation. Unlike the restrained elegance of the rest of the house, this chamber was a sanctuary of femininity. Delicate furniture upholstered in soft blues and creams, vases brimming with fresh flowers, and shelves lined with books and curios created an atmosphere of gentle refinement. A young woman rose from a chaise longue by the window, her face lighting with a smile of genuine pleasure. Lady Eleanor Cavendish bore a striking resemblance to her brother, sharing his dark hair and fine bone structure, but where his features were hardened by experience, hers remained soft, almost ethereal. "Lady Augusta," she said, coming forward with outstretched hands, "how delightful that you accepted our invitation. I have heard so much about you." Augusta took the offered hands, immediately warming to Eleanor's unaffected manner. "I confess I was surprised to receive it. Your brother and I are barely acquainted." A knowing smile touched Eleanor's lips. "Alexander rarely does anything without purpose, Lady Augusta. Please sit with me. Harrington, the tea, if you would." As they settled onto the chaise, Augusta studied the younger woman. Lady Eleanor appeared to be in her early 20s, perhaps a year or two younger than Augusta herself. There was a delicacy about her that suggested ill health, reinforced by the slight pallor of her complexion. "You must forgive my brother's abruptness," Eleanor said as Harrington returned with a tea tray. "Social graces have never been his forte, I'm afraid." "Yet he dances beautifully," Augusta observed. Eleanor laughed, a bright musical sound. "Her skill hard-won through strict instruction and rigorous practice. Our father insisted upon it." Her expression sobered slightly. "Alexander was not always as you see him now. Circumstances have hardened him." "You refer to the death of his wife?" Augusta asked, then immediately regretted her boldness. "Forgive me, that was unconscionably direct." "Not at all," Eleanor replied, pouring tea with a steady hand. "It is refreshing to converse with someone who speaks plainly. Yes, Caroline's death changed him profoundly. But it was not only that." She paused, seeming to weigh her words. "My brother has shouldered many burdens alone." Augusta accepted the offered cup. "Including your care." Eleanor's gaze sharpened with interest. "You are perceptive, Lady Augusta. Yes, I have been in poor health since childhood. Alexander has been both brother and guardian to me since our parents' passing 10 years ago." "That must have been difficult for you both," Augusta said softly. "I lost my parents young as well." "Yes, I know." At Augusta's questioning look, Eleanor coloured slightly. "Alexander mentioned it. He researches those who catch his attention." Before Augusta could respond to this revelation, the drawing-room door opened once more. Alexander Cavendish stood on the threshold, his tall figure silhouetted against the light from the hallway. "Lady Augusta," he said with a slight bow. "I trust my sister has been entertaining you adequately." "Your sister is a delight, Your Grace," Augusta replied, rising to curtsy. "I am grateful for her invitation." "It was your invitation, as I recall," he corrected, moving into the room with that same predatory grace she had observed the previous evening. "Alexander, must you be so literal?" Eleanor chided gently. "You'll frighten Lady Augusta away before we have become properly acquainted." "I doubt Lady Augusta frightens easily," he replied, his gaze never leaving Augusta's face. "Do you, Your Grace?" The challenge in his tone was unmistakable. "I believe I mentioned last night that I have little left to fear, Your Grace," Augusta responded evenly, "though I confess your reputation does give one pause." Something like amusement flickered across his stern features. "Reputations are often exaggerated, and sometimes well-earned," she countered. As they concluded their tea, Augusta found herself increasingly intrigued by this complex man and his gentle sister. When Alexander unexpectedly invited her to a small dinner party the following evening, she accepted, partly out of genuine interest in Eleanor, but also because of the enigma that was the Duke of Shadowmere. As her carriage departed Shadowmere House, Augusta discovered a small envelope on the seat beside her that had not been there when she arrived. Inside was a single sheet of heavy cream paper, bearing a message in bold masculine handwriting. "Lady Augusta, beware of forming attachments too quickly in London. Not all are what they seem, and some may seek to use your connection to me for their own purposes. Trust few. Question everything." Until tomorrow, AC Augusta stared at the cryptic warning, a chill settling over her despite the warmth of the afternoon. What could it mean? Was it a warning against others or against the Duke himself? One thing was becoming increasingly clear. In accepting Alexander Cavendish's invitation to Waltz, she had set in motion events beyond her control. The question now was whether she had the courage to see where they might lead. The cryptic note from Alexander Cavendish haunted Augusta's thoughts as she prepared for the dinner party at Shadowmere House. Standing before her mirror, she studied her reflection in the midnight blue gown Catherine had insisted she wear. Too somber for a widow emerging from mourning, her cousin had declared, but perfect for intriguing a certain duke. Augusta had protested such calculation, yet couldn't deny the flutter of anticipation she felt at the prospect of seeing Alexander again. His warning echoed in her mind. Trust few, question everything. What dangers lurked beneath the polished surface of London society? And why had he singled her out for both attention and caution? The dinner party at Shadowmere House proved to be an intimate affair, with only 8 guests gathered in the elegant dining room. Augusta, seated to the Duke's right as the guest of honor, found herself the object of intense scrutiny from the other attendees. Lord James Harrington, a distinguished gentleman in his 50s with kind eyes and a ready smile, had been introduced as the Duke's closest friend and advisor. His wife, Lady Sophia, a graceful woman with auburn hair threaded with silver, had immediately taken Augusta under her wing, her gentle manner providing a welcome buffer against the more probing attention of the other guests. Across the table sat Sir William Preston, a banker whose sharp gaze seemed to calculate the worth of everything and everyone in his path. Beside him his wife Henrietta, a woman of remarkable beauty and equally remarkable coldness, had barely acknowledged Augusta's presence beyond a perfunctory nod. Catherine had been placed beside Lord Richard Blackwood, a young viscount whose charm and good looks had earned him a reputation as one of London's most eligible bachelors. The final guest, Dr. Edward Bennet, a serious man with intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, was seated at Eleanor's right hand and appeared to divide his attention between his hostess and professional observations of the company at large. "Lady Augusta," Sir William addressed her as servants cleared the soup course, "I understand you manage your late husband's estate yourself. Most unusual for a woman of your age and station." Augusta felt Alexander stiffen beside her. "I have excellent stewards, Sir William, but yes, I take an active interest in Hadley's operations." "How progressive," Lady Preston remarked, her tone suggesting it was anything but admirable. "I believe competence knows no gender," Lord Harrington interjected smoothly. "And from what I've heard, Hadley Manor prospers under Lady Augusta's guidance." "Indeed," the Duke confirmed, his deep voice commanding immediate attention. The estate's yield has increased by 15% since she assumed control, a remarkable achievement in these economic times. Augusta turned to him in surprise. You seem remarkably well informed about my affairs, Your Grace. As I mentioned yesterday, neighboring properties are of particular interest to me, he replied, his expression unreadable. Speaking of which, Lord Blackwood, how fares your father's venture in Cumberland? The Viscount, who had been gazing at Augusta with undisguised admiration, started slightly. Ah, progressing well, I believe. Father seldom shares the details with me, I'm afraid. A pity, the Duke remarked. One would think the heir to such extensive holdings would take a keener interest in their management. Lord Blackwood flushed, and Augusta felt a twinge of sympathy for the young man. Perhaps Lord Blackwood has other interests that command his attention, she suggested. Indeed I do, Lady Augusta, he replied gratefully. I am something of an amateur botanist. I've been cataloguing native orchid species in Derbyshire. How fascinating, Eleanor exclaimed. You must see our conservatory after dinner. Alexander has imported several rare species from the continent. I should like that very much, Lord Blackwood replied, his gaze lingering on Augusta rather than Eleanor. Augusta felt the Duke's eyes upon her, assessing her reaction to the Viscount's obvious interest. She kept her expression neutral, though inwardly she was puzzled by the strange tension she sensed between the two men. The meal progressed through several more courses, the conversation flowing easily under Lord Harrington's skilled guidance. Augusta found herself drawn into discussions of literature, music, and even politics, subjects she had missed during her self-imposed isolation in Hampshire. You are remarkably well read for a young woman, Dr. Bennet observed, after she had contributed to a debate on Wordsworth's later works. My father believed in educating daughters as well as sons, Augusta replied, and widowhood provides ample time for reading. A waste, Lady Preston murmured just loudly enough to be heard. A beautiful young woman like yourself, buried in books and ledgers. I consider it neither waste nor burial, Augusta countered politely. Merely a different application of one's faculties than society typically expects of women. Well said, the Duke commented, and Augusta detected a note of approval in his voice that sent an unexpected thrill through her. As the final course was served, Eleanor turned the conversation to the upcoming charity ball for the Children's Hospital, an event she was apparently helping to organize despite her frail health. We had hoped to secure the assembly rooms, she explained, but they were booked for a private function. We're still searching for a suitable venue. What about the Pembroke Ballroom? Catherine suggested. I'm sure my husband would be amenable. That's very kind, Eleanor replied, but we anticipate over 300 guests. I fear even your generous ballroom would be somewhat cramped. Perhaps Shadowmere House could host, Augusta suggested impulsively. Your ballroom seems more than adequate. A hush fell over the table. The Duke rarely opened his home to large gatherings, a fact Augusta realized belatedly as she noted the surprised expressions around her. An excellent suggestion, Alexander said after a moment's consideration. Eleanor, make the necessary arrangements. Eleanor's face lit with delight. Are you certain, Alexander? It would mean opening much of the house to the public. For a worthy cause, he replied, his eyes meeting Augusta's. I find I'm willing to make exceptions to my usual privacy. The significance of this concession was not lost on the other guests. Lady Preston's eyes narrowed speculatively, while Lord Harrington regarded his friend with undisguised astonishment. How generous, Lady Preston said silkily. One wonders what has prompted this sudden philanthropy. Perhaps, the Duke replied, his gaze still fixed on Augusta. I am simply following Lady Augusta's admirable example of emerging from seclusion. After dinner, the gentlemen declined to separate for port, instead joining the ladies in the music room where Eleanor was persuaded to play the pianoforte. Her skill was considerable, the music filling the elegant chamber with haunting melodies that seemed to reflect her gentle yet melancholy spirit. Augusta found herself standing near a set of French doors that opened onto a small balcony. Seeking a moment's respite from the intensity of the evening, she slipped outside into the cool night air. The balcony overlooked a walled garden, silvered by moonlight and fragrant with early roses. Augusta drew a deep breath, steadying herself against the stone balustrade. Seeking escape so soon? The Duke's voice behind her caused her to start. Merely some fresh air, she replied, turning to face him. In the moonlight his features appeared less severe, the hard lines of his face softened by shadow. My guests can be somewhat overwhelming, he acknowledged, moving to stand beside her. Particularly the Prestons. Sir William seems rather calculating. An apt description, the Duke said with a dry smile. He is a man who sees relationships purely in terms of advantage. And Lady Preston? Henrietta? Something darkened in his expression. She is a woman accustomed to getting what she wants, by whatever means necessary. There was a history there, Augusta sensed, though whether romantic or otherwise she could not determine. They seem unusual choices for an intimate dinner. One keeps potential allies close, he replied, and potential adversaries closer still. And which am I? Augusta asked boldly. The Duke studied her for a long moment, his grey eyes reflecting the moonlight. Neither, I think, at least not yet. Then what am I, Your Grace? Why invite me here? Why single me out at the ball? I am nobody of consequence. I disagree, he said softly. You are a woman of considerable consequence, Lady Augusta, more than you realize. Before she could press him further, the sound of the French doors opening interrupted their exchange. Lord Blackwood stepped onto the balcony, his handsome face lighting with pleasure at the sight of Augusta. Ah, there you are, Lady Augusta. I had hoped you might honor us with a song. Lady Eleanor assures me you have a lovely voice. Augusta glanced at the Duke, whose expression had reverted to its customary impassivity. Perhaps another time, Lord Blackwood. I fear I am somewhat out of practice. Then perhaps you might allow me to escort you through the conservatory. The Viscount persisted. The moonlight makes it quite magical, I'm told. Again Augusta looked to the Duke, uncertain why she felt the need for his approval. He gave an almost imperceptible nod. I would be delighted, she said, accepting Lord Blackwood's offered arm. As they turned to leave, the Duke spoke once more. Lord Blackwood. The younger man paused. Yes, Your Grace? Take care with my orchids, Alexander said, his voice deceptively mild. Some varieties can be quite toxic if handled improperly. The warning was clear, though its precise meaning remained ambiguous. Lord Blackwood's arm tensed beneath Augusta's hand. I shall be the soul of caution, Your Grace, he replied with forced lightness. As they made their way toward the conservatory, Augusta found herself glancing back at the solitary figure on the balcony. The Duke stood motionless, his face in shadow, watching their departure with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine, not entirely of fear. The conservatory was indeed magical in the moonlight, its glass walls and ceiling creating a cathedral of silver and shadow. Exotic plants created mysterious silhouettes, and the air was heavy with the scent of night-blooming flowers. Lady Augusta, Lord Blackwood began as they strolled between rows of rare specimens, I hope you will permit me to call upon you during your stay in London. That is very kind, my lord, but I'm not certain— Please, he interrupted, stopping to face her. I have admired you from afar for some time. Even before your husband's passing, your grace and intelligence were spoken of with great respect. Augusta was surprised by his earnestness. You flatter me, sir. Not at all, he insisted. And now, seeing you here, I find myself even more captivated. May I hope that you might consider me as a friend, at least? There was something almost desperate in his manner that puzzled her. Lord Blackwood, we are barely acquainted. Richard, please, he said, taking her hand. And acquaintances must begin somewhere, must they not? Before Augusta could respond, a quiet voice spoke from the shadows. Lord Blackwood, I believe Lady Eleanor is asking for you. Dr. Bennet emerged from behind a large palm, his expression carefully neutral. Lord Blackwood released Augusta's hand reluctantly. Of course, he said. Lady Augusta, will you accompany me back? In a moment, she replied. I should like to admire the orchids a while longer. With obvious reluctance, Lord Blackwood departed, leaving Augusta alone with the doctor. You should be cautious, Lady Augusta, Dr. Bennet said, once the Viscount was out of earshot. Regarding Lord Blackwood? She asked. Regarding everyone in this house, he replied, his voice low, including, perhaps especially, our host. Augusta studied the serious-faced physician. You are the Duke's doctor, are you not? And his friend, I hope, Bennet confirmed, which is why I feel compelled to warn you. The Duke's interest in you has not gone unnoticed, and there are those who might seek to use you to gain advantage over him. Use me? How? Dr. Bennet hesitated. The circumstances surrounding the first Duchess's death were complicated. There are those who believe the Duke was somehow responsible. though I know this to be false. And you think Lord Blackwood is among these people? I think, the doctor said carefully, that Lord Blackwood's sudden interest in you may not be entirely based on your personal charms, considerable though they are. His family has a long-standing feud with the Cavendishes, dating back generations. Augusta frowned. Then why would the Duke invite him here? Alexander keeps his enemies under close observation, Bennet replied. And perhaps he wished to see how you would respond to the Viscount's attentions. I am not a pawn to be moved about on some chessboard, Augusta said, indignation rising. No, Bennet agreed, but you may find yourself on one nonetheless. Be careful, Lady Augusta. Alexander Cavendish is a good man despite what rumours may suggest, but his world is more dangerous than you know. With that cryptic warning, the doctor offered his arm. Shall we rejoin the others? As they walked back toward the music room, Augusta's mind whirled with questions. What game was being played here? And why did she seem to be at its centre? The remainder of the evening passed without incident, though Augusta was acutely aware of the undercurrents flowing beneath the polite conversation. Lord Blackwood continued his attentions, though somewhat subdued after Dr. Bennet's intervention. Lady Preston watched her with calculating eyes, while Sir William engaged the Duke in what appeared to be a heated discussion of business matters in a corner of the room. As the evening drew to a close, Augusta found herself once more in the Duke's company as he escorted her and Catherine to their waiting carriage. "I trust you found the evening tolerable," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "More than tolerable," Augusta replied honestly, though somewhat perplexing. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Life is seldom straightforward, Lady Augusta." "So it seems," she agreed, "particularly in your orbit, Your Grace." He assisted her into the carriage with careful hands. "Until the charity ball, then. I shall call upon you tomorrow to discuss the arrangements." "Tomorrow?" Augusta echoed, surprised. "Unless that would be inconvenient?" "Not at all," she replied, aware of Catherine's curious gaze. "We shall expect you." As the carriage pulled away, Catherine leaned forward eagerly. "Augusta, you dark horse, what have you done to captivate the fearsome Duke of Shadowmere? He scarcely took his eyes from you all evening." Augusta shook her head, genuinely bewildered. "I haven't the faintest idea, Catherine. We've barely exchanged more than pleasantries." "Nonsense! Something has clearly caught his interest." Catherine's eyes gleamed with excitement. "How extraordinary! The most elusive bachelor in England pursuing my widowed cousin." "He is hardly pursuing me," Augusta protested, "and I am not seeking his attention." Catherine's expression grew serious. "Be careful, Augusta. The Duke's reputation is complicated. There are rumours about his first wife's death that were never satisfactorily explained." "So Dr. Bennet implied," Augusta murmured. "You discussed this with Bennet?" Catherine looked shocked. "What did he say?" Augusta hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal. Only that the circumstances were complicated, but that he believed the Duke innocent of any wrongdoing. "Well, he would say that, wouldn't he? Bennet has been the Duke's physician for years." Catherine sighed. "I'm not saying you should avoid Alexander Cavendish. Heaven knows you deserve some excitement after 2 years of mourning. Just proceed with caution." "I assure you, caution is uppermost in my mind," Augusta replied, though even as she spoke she wondered if it was entirely true. There was something about the Duke that called to her, a recognition of kindred pain perhaps, or simply the magnetic pull of a man whose every word and gesture hinted at hidden depths. Later that night, as Augusta prepared for bed in the guest chamber of Catherine's townhouse, her lady's maid, Wilson, handed her a small package. "This arrived by messenger just after we returned, Your Grace," Wilson explained. "The footman said it was most urgent." The package, wrapped in plain brown paper and sealed with unmarked wax, contained a folded letter and a small brass key. Augusta opened the letter with trembling fingers. "Lady Augusta, forgive the late hour of this communication. Matters have arisen that require immediate attention. The enclosed key opens the garden gate at the rear of Shadowmere House. Come at your earliest convenience tomorrow morning. Enter through the garden and proceed to the conservatory. Tell no one of this message, not even your cousin. Trust no one until we have spoken. A.C." Augusta stared at the cryptic note, her heart racing. What could possibly be so urgent as to require such secrecy? And why did the Duke trust her? a virtual stranger with whatever mysterious situation had arisen. "Is everything well, Your Grace?" Wilson inquired, noting her mistress's troubled expression. "Yes," Augusta replied, quickly folding the letter. "Merely a social matter. That will be all for tonight, Wilson." After her maid had departed, Augusta paced the bedroom, the brass key clutched in her palm. Every instinct for self-preservation urged her to ignore the summons, to return the key unused. Yet something stronger, curiosity perhaps, or a deeper recognition that whatever path her life was to take now depended on her response to this moment, compelled her to set the key on her nightstand and blow out the candle. Tomorrow she would answer the Duke's call. For better or worse, she would step fully into the shadow world of Alexander Cavendish and discover what fate awaited her there. The brass key felt impossibly heavy in Augusta's pocket as she made her way through the misty London morning. Having slipped away from Catherine's townhouse under the pretense of an early walk, she navigated the quiet streets with quickening steps, her heart pounding with each block that brought her closer to Shadowmere House. The Duke's urgent summons had robbed her of sleep. What could be so pressing that it required such secrecy? And why had he chosen to trust her, a woman he had known for mere days? These questions had circled her mind throughout the night, leaving her both apprehensive and undeniably intrigued. The rear garden of Shadowmere House was enclosed by a high stone wall, ivy-covered and forbidding. The gate, almost hidden between two ancient oak trees, yielded to the key with a soft click. Beyond lay a formal garden, its paths and hedges rendered ethereal by the morning mist. Augusta followed a gravel path toward the house, her footsteps muffled by the damp air. The conservatory gleamed like a crystal palace at the garden's edge, its glass walls clouded with condensation. She hesitated at the door, suddenly aware of the impropriety of her situation. To visit a bachelor's home unchaperoned at his secret invitation, it was scandalous by any measure. Yet something in the urgency of the Duke's note convinced her that conventional proprieties must yield to more pressing concerns. The conservatory door opened silently, admitting her to the warm, moist atmosphere within. In daylight, the collection of exotic plants was even more impressive than it had appeared by moonlight. Orchids in every conceivable color bloomed alongside ferns, palms, and flowering vines that created a verdant labyrinth. Lady Augusta. She turned to find the Duke emerging from between two towering palms. He was dressed more casually than she had yet seen him, in riding breeches and a white shirt open at the collar, his dark hair slightly disheveled. The effect was startlingly intimate. "Your Grace," she acknowledged, suddenly acutely aware of her compromised position. "Your note sounded urgent." "It was," he confirmed, stepping closer. In the diffuse light filtering through the glass ceiling, his grey eyes appeared almost silver. "I apologize for the secrecy, but I feared our conversation last night might have been overheard." "By whom?" "There are ears everywhere in London society," he replied, "and what I must tell you requires absolute privacy." Augusta steeled herself. "I'm listening." Alexander gestured toward a small wrought-iron bench partially concealed by flowering vines. "Please, sit." Once they were seated, he began. "I believe you may be in danger, Lady Augusta." "From what quarter?" she asked, surprised by her own calm. "That remains unclear," he admitted, "but certain events have come to my attention that suggest someone wishes to harm you, or perhaps use you to harm me." Augusta frowned. "That seems far-fetched, Your Grace. I'm of no particular importance." "You underestimate yourself," he said, his voice softening. "But more relevantly, you underestimate what your growing association with me might mean to certain parties." "You refer to the rumors about your first wife?" His expression tightened. "Partly. Caroline's death was not what it seemed, but neither was it what rumor suggests." "What did happen?" Augusta asked directly. Alexander was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on some distant point. "Caroline suffered from melancholia," he finally said. "Severe, debilitating melancholia that worsened after our marriage. I sought every treatment, consulted every specialist. Nothing helped." Augusta's heart constricted at the pain evident in his voice. "I'm sorry. The night she died," he continued, "I was away on business. She took an overdose of laudanum. The official finding was accidental death, but there were those who suspected otherwise." "That you were somehow responsible," Augusta surmised. Yes. There were letters, you see. Desperate, confused letters Caroline had written expressing fear of me. Letters she wrote during the depths of her illness, when she sometimes believed I meant her harm. And these letters became public. Not public, no, but they fell into the hands of certain individuals who have used them to influence me over the years. Blackmail, Augusta breathed. A crude term, but accurate. His eyes met hers directly. I tell you this, Lady Augusta, not to gain your sympathy, but so you understand the nature of the world you have entered by associating with me. And you believe someone might use me to further pressure you? Or worse, he said grimly. Last night, after our guests departed, I received this. He withdrew a folded paper from his pocket and handed it to her. The message, composed of letters cut from newspapers and pasted to the page, read, "The widow will follow the wife unless the Duke relinquishes all. She danced with death at Pembroke House." Augusta felt a chill despite the conservatory's warmth. "This is disturbing." "It is a threat," Alexander said flatly. "Against you. But why? What could anyone hope to gain by harming me?" "Several possibilities present themselves," he replied. "The most obvious being to pressure me into selling certain properties or business interests I have acquired in recent years, properties that some believe were obtained through questionable means." "Were they?" "I have never broken the law, Lady Augusta," he said carefully, "but I have perhaps bent it on occasion, particularly when dealing with those who deserved no better." Augusta studied his face, seeking evidence of deception, but finding only grim determination. "Why tell me this? Why not simply distance yourself from me, remove me as a target?" "Would that be your preference?" he asked, his expression unreadable. "I did not say that," she replied. "I merely question your strategy." For the first time that morning, a ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Strategy, Lady Augusta. You speak as though we are engaged in warfare." "Are we not?" she countered. "It seems I have inadvertently stumbled onto a battlefield of your making." "Not entirely of my making," he corrected. "But yes, you have become involved in a conflict that predates our acquaintance. For that, I apologize." "You still haven't answered my question," Augusta persisted. "Why not simply avoid me? Surely that would be the simplest solution." Alexander rose abruptly, pacing the narrow path between exotic plants. "The simplest, yes, but perhaps not the most satisfactory." "Meaning?" He turned to face her, his expression unexpectedly vulnerable. "Meaning, Lady Augusta, that I find I am unwilling to relinquish your acquaintance even to ensure your safety. Selfish, perhaps, but true." The admission, delivered with such stark honesty, momentarily robbed Augusta of speech. I don't know what to say." "Say you will allow me to protect you," he replied, returning to sit beside her. "Say you will trust me, despite the rumors, despite the danger." Augusta took a deep breath. "How do you propose to protect me?" "First, by keeping you close," he said. "The charity ball provides an excellent opportunity. As co-hosts, we will have legitimate reason for frequent communication." "And second?" "By discovering who sent this threat," he replied grimly. "I have suspicions, but no proof as yet. Until I do, you must be vigilant. Accept no invitations without consulting me first. Drink nothing at social gatherings that you have not seen poured. And trust no one completely, not even those who seem most benevolent." "Not even you?" Augusta asked, only half in jest. His grey eyes met hers with unexpected warmth. "Especially not me, perhaps. I am, after all, the source of your danger." "Yet here I sit," she observed, "conspiring with you nonetheless. Does that make you reckless, Lady Augusta, or merely curious?" "Perhaps both," she admitted, "though I prefer to think of it as discerning. I judge people by their actions, not rumors." "And what have my actions told you thus far?" Augusta considered the question carefully. "That you are protective of those you care for, that you value intelligence and directness, that you harbor secrets, yes, but not necessarily sinister ones." "A generous assessment," he murmured. "Time will tell if it is an accurate one," she replied. Their eyes held for a long moment, and Augusta became acutely aware of their isolation, of the impropriety of their meeting. Yet she felt no fear, only a curious sense of standing at a crossroads, her future hanging in the balance of this moment. The spell was broken by the distant sound of the garden gate opening. Alexander rose swiftly, moving to the conservatory door to peer out into the mist. "Harrington," he said, tension leaving his shoulders. "My steward. I must have lost track of time. We have estate business to discuss." "I should go," Augusta said, rising. "Wait." He caught her hand, his touch sending a jolt of awareness through her. "Meet me tomorrow at the Lending Library on Bond Street, 3 o'clock. We must discuss the charity ball arrangements, and I shall have more information by then." Augusta nodded. "Until tomorrow, then." He released her hand reluctantly. "Take care, Lady Augusta. Remember what I said. Trust no one completely." "Not even myself?" she asked, attempting to lighten the moment. His expression remained grave. "Especially not yourself, if your instincts tell you to trust me too readily. I am not perhaps as good a man as you believe." With those unsettling words lingering in the air between them, Augusta slipped out through a side door of the conservatory, making her way back through the misty garden, and out the gate through which she had entered less than an hour before. The days that followed passed in a whirlwind of activity, as Augusta found herself drawn deeper into the Duke's world. The charity ball provided legitimate reason for frequent meetings, often in the company of Eleanor, whose genuine warmth and affection had quickly endeared her to Augusta. Together, they planned every detail of the event, from the floral arrangements to the supper menu, while Alexander attended to security matters with unnerving thoroughness. "You truly believe someone might attempt something at the ball itself?" Augusta asked during one such planning session in Shadowmere House's elegant library. "I believe in preparing for all possibilities," Alexander replied, not looking up from the guest list he was scrutinizing. "Preston has confirmed his attendance, though Henrietta claims a prior engagement. Do you still suspect Sir William of sending the threat?" "He remains the most likely candidate," Alexander confirmed. "His bank holds significant loans against properties that border my eastern estates, properties I've recently expressed interest in acquiring. If he can force me to sell certain key holdings, the value of his collateral would increase substantially." "And Lady Preston?" Augusta inquired, recalling the calculating look in Henrietta's eyes whenever she glanced between Augusta and the Duke. Alexander's expression darkened. "Henrietta's grievances are more personal. She once harbored expectations I had no intention of fulfilling." "Before your marriage to Caroline?" "Yes," he said shortly, clearly unwilling to elaborate further. "In any case, with both Prestons present at the ball, along with Lord Blackwood and several other potential adversaries, vigilance will be essential." "You suspect Lord Blackwood as well?" Augusta asked, surprised. Despite the young Viscount's continued attempts to engage her interest during the past weeks, she had found him charming, if somewhat shallow, hardly the type to resort to anonymous threats. "I suspect everyone until proven trustworthy," Alexander replied, his gaze finally meeting hers. "A habit that has served me well over the years." "And yet you trust me," she observed. "A woman you've known less than a month." Something softened in his expression. "Trust is perhaps too absolute a term. Let us say I am inclined to believe in your integrity, an inclination that grows stronger with each passing day." The admission, delivered with such careful precision, nevertheless sent a flutter of warmth through Augusta's chest. Before she could respond, the library door opened to admit Eleanor, her pale face flushed with excitement. "The final RSVPs have arrived," she announced, waving a sheaf of cards. "Over 300 guests confirmed. Augusta, we've done it. This will be the most successful fundraiser in the hospital's history." As Eleanor reviewed the acceptances, Augusta found her attention drawn to Alexander. He had returned to his papers, but she felt his awareness of her like a physical touch. Something was shifting between them, something beyond the practical alliance formed in the face of unknown threats, something that frightened and exhilarated her in equal measure. The evening of the charity ball arrived, with a flurry of last-minute preparations. Augusta had spent the day at Shadowmere House, overseeing the final arrangements alongside Eleanor. Now, as she prepared to change for the evening, she found herself in the elegant guest chamber that had been set aside for her use, a courtesy that had raised Catherine's eyebrows, but which Eleanor had insisted upon as practical necessity. "You can hardly be expected to travel back and forth in your ball gown," Eleanor had declared. "Besides, Alexander says it's safer for you to remain here until the last guests have departed." The reminder of potential danger cast a momentary shadow over Augusta's anticipation. Despite Alexander's vigilance, no further threats had materialized, nor had he been able to prove Sir William's involvement in the original message. Yet Augusta could not shake the feeling of being watched whenever she ventured into society, a prickling awareness of hostile scrutiny from unknown quarters. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Wilson, her lady's maid, entered with a large box. "This just arrived for you, Your Grace," Wilson said, placing the box on the bed. "From His Grace, the Duke." Augusta opened the package with curious fingers. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, lay a magnificent gown of silver silk embellished with delicate beadwork that caught the light like tiny stars. Beneath it was a smaller velvet box containing a pair of diamond earrings and a matching bracelet of breathtaking elegance. A folded note lay atop the jewelry. "For tonight's co-hostess, the silver suits your eyes." Augusta traced her fingers over the bold handwriting, her heart quickening at the personal nature of the gift. It was not merely extravagant, it was thoughtful. The silver tones a perfect complement to her coloring, the style exactly to her taste without being ostentatious. "Shall I help you dress, Your Grace?" Wilson asked, her eyes wide at the splendor of the gown. Augusta nodded, suddenly unable to speak past the emotion tightening her throat. Something had changed irrevocably in her life since that first waltz with the Duke of Shadowmere. Whether for good or ill remained to be seen, but one thing was certain. There would be no returning to the quiet isolation of her widowhood. An hour later, Augusta descended the grand staircase, a vision in silver silk and duchess lace. Alexander waited at the bottom, his tall figure commanding in formal black evening attire. In the 2 weeks since their clandestine meeting in the conservatory, something had shifted between them. A deepening of trust, perhaps, or something more profound that neither dared name. "Lady Augusta," he said, taking her gloved hand as she reached the final step. "You outshine every star in the heavens tonight." "Flattery, Your Grace," she replied with a smile. "How unlike you." "Not flattery," he corrected. "Merely accurate observation." Eleanor appeared at her brother's side, lovely in pale blue that complemented her delicate coloring. "Augusta, you look magnificent. The ball will be the talk of London for months." "Thanks to your tireless efforts," Augusta said warmly, genuinely fond of the younger woman who had become a dear friend over the past weeks. "And yours," Eleanor insisted. "Alexander says you have a gift for organization that rivals his own. High praise indeed from my perfectionist brother." The Duke's lips quirked in a half-smile. "I merely recognize efficiency when I encounter it." "Such a romantic soul," Eleanor teased, nudging her brother affectionately. "Oh, Dr. Bennet has arrived. I must speak with him about the hospital committee meeting tomorrow." As Eleanor hurried off to greet the physician, Alexander offered Augusta his arm. "Shall we greet our guests? The first carriages are arriving." For the next hour, they stood together in the entrance hall, welcoming London's elite to Shadowmere House. Augusta noted with interest the varying reactions to their joint hosting duties, surprise from most, speculation from some, and poorly concealed disapproval from a select few, notably Lady Preston, who arrived on the arm of a distinguished gentleman who was not her husband. "Sir William sends his regrets," Henrietta explained, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Urgent business in Manchester. Lord Everley was kind enough to escort me in his absence." "How fortunate," Alexander remarked, his tone neutral, though Augusta sensed his tension. "Lord Everley, I believe you know Lady Augusta Blackwell?" The silver-haired Earl bowed over Augusta's hand. "Only by reputation, I'm afraid. A pleasure to make your acquaintance at last, Lady Augusta." "The pleasure is mine, my lord," Augusta replied automatically, though something in the Earl's appraising gaze made her uneasy. As the couple moved on, Alexander leaned close to murmur in her ear, "Keep your distance from Everley. He and Preston are close associates, and his presence here is no coincidence." The warning sent a shiver down Augusta's spine, a reminder that beneath the glittering surface of the evening lay darker currents. Lord Blackwood arrived shortly thereafter, his handsome face lighting at the sight of Augusta. Over the past weeks, he had called at Catherine's townhouse several times, his attentions becoming increasingly marked despite Augusta's polite rebuffs. "Lady Augusta," he said, bowing deeply, "you are a vision tonight. I hope I may claim at least one dance." Before Augusta could respond, Alexander intervened smoothly. I fear Lady Augusta's dance card is quite full, Lord Blackwood. As co-hostess, her duties are numerous this evening. Blackwood's smile faltered slightly. Of course, perhaps later then. As he moved away, Augusta glanced at Alexander. That was rather pointed, Your Grace. Blackwood has been asking questions about you, he replied quietly. Questions that go beyond mere social interest. What sort of questions? About your finances, primarily. The exact value of Hadley Manor. Your connections in Hampshire. His grey eyes darkened. He is not what he seems, Augusta. The use of her given name, rare despite their growing closeness, emphasized the seriousness of his concern. You still suspect him of involvement in the threat against me? I suspect everyone, Alexander replied grimly. But yes, he ranks high among my concerns. The arrival of the final guests prevented further discussion. Soon the ballroom was filled with elegant couples circling to the strains of a waltz, the atmosphere one of unrestrained festivity. Augusta found herself partnered first with Lord Harrington, whose kind manner and gentle humour provided a welcome respite from the underlying tension of the evening. You have wrought a miracle, Lady Augusta, he remarked as they navigated the crowded floor. I have not seen Shadowmere House so alive in years. The credit belongs to Eleanor and His Grace, Augusta demurred. I think not, Harrington replied with a knowing smile. Alexander has changed since meeting you. There is a lightness to him that has been absent since Caroline's death, some might say even before. Augusta felt her cheeks warm. We are merely acquaintances, my lord. Of course, he agreed, though his eyes twinkled with gentle skepticism. Just as the sun and moon are merely celestial bodies with no influence upon the tides. The dance ended before Augusta could formulate a suitable response. Her next partner was Dr. Bennet, whose serious demeanour concealed a dry wit she had come to appreciate during their committee meetings for the hospital fundraiser. You appear to have survived the preparations unscathed, he observed, as they joined the set for a country dance. Eleanor thrives under your influence. I have not seen her so animated in years. She is a remarkable young woman, Augusta replied sincerely. I only wish her health were more robust. Bennet's expression grew thoughtful. Indeed, though I believe her condition improves with positive stimulation, your friendship has been a tonic, more effective than any medicine I could prescribe. As has the Duke's increased attentiveness, Augusta noted. He dotes on her, though he tries to disguise it beneath that stern exterior. Alexander Cavendish is a man of deep feelings carefully controlled, Bennet said. Those who earn his regard are fortunate indeed. And those who earn his enmity? Augusta asked, thinking of the mysterious threat. Bennet's eyes met hers soberly. Would be wise to proceed with caution. The Duke does not forgive easily, nor forget at all. Augusta had just accepted a glass of champagne from a footman when Lady Preston appeared at her elbow. Lady Augusta, Henrietta purred, her crimson gown a striking contrast to Augusta's silver. How cleverly you have managed everything. One would almost believe you were born to Shadowmere House rather than a recent acquisition. Augusta maintained her composure despite the insult. The Duke and Lady Eleanor have been most welcoming. The success of tonight belongs to them. How modest, Lady Preston remarked, sipping her champagne, though I wonder if you fully appreciate the position in which you find yourself. I'm afraid I don't take your meaning. Henrietta's perfect lips curved in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. No, let me be plain then. Alexander Cavendish is not a man who forms attachments lightly. That he has singled you out is noteworthy. We share an interest in the Children's Hospital, Augusta replied carefully. Nothing more. Lady Preston laughed, a tinkling sound devoid of warmth. My dear, we are both women of the world. The Duke's interest extends far beyond charity work, as all of London can see. I merely wonder if you understand what accepting such interest might entail. Again, I must profess confusion, Lady Preston. Henrietta leaned closer, her voice dropping to a confidential murmur. There are aspects of Alexander's character unknown to you, darker aspects that led to his first wife's unfortunate end. Augusta felt a chill despite the warmth of the crowded room. I believe such rumors are greatly exaggerated. Are they? Lady Preston arched a perfect eyebrow. Perhaps you should ask why Caroline was so afraid in those final months, why she wrote those desperate letters begging for help, why no one dared to intervene until it was too late. Before Augusta could respond, Alexander appeared at her side, his expression cold as he regarded Lady Preston. "Henrietta, I trust you are enjoying the evening." "Immensely," she replied, unperturbed by his frosty tone. "Lady Augusta and I were just becoming better acquainted." "How fortunate for her," he said, with cutting precision. "Augusta, Eleanor requests your presence in the small drawing-room. Something regarding the charity auction." Grateful for the interruption, Augusta excused herself, though Lady Preston's parting smile lingered unpleasantly in her mind as Alexander guided her through the crowd. "What did Henrietta say to you?" he asked once they were relatively private in a quiet alcove. "Nothing of consequence," Augusta replied, reluctant to repeat the insinuations. Alexander's jaw tightened. "She mentioned Caroline." "It wasn't a question." "Yes," Augusta admitted. "She suggested there was more to your wife's death than is commonly known." "And do you believe her?" His voice was carefully neutral, but Augusta sensed the importance of her answer. "I believe," she said slowly, "that people rarely act without motive. Lady Preston clearly bears you ill will. The question is why." Something like relief flickered in his eyes. "A perceptive observation. Henrietta once believed herself to be a suitable match for me. I disagreed. Before your marriage to Caroline?" "Yes. Henrietta married Preston a month after my engagement to Caroline was announced." His expression darkened. "She has never forgiven either slight." A sudden commotion near the ballroom entrance interrupted their conversation. Lord Blackwood had arrived, clearly intoxicated, his handsome features flushed as he loudly demanded another glass of champagne from a startled footman. "Damnation," Alexander muttered. "Just what the evening needed." He started toward the disturbance, but Augusta caught his arm. "Let me. A scene would only draw more attention." Before he could object, Augusta moved swiftly to Blackwood's side, taking his arm with a firm grip disguised as a friendly gesture. "Lord Blackwood, how pleasant to see you again. I believe you promised to show me the library earlier. Shall we?" Confusion crossed his face, followed by a slow smile of comprehension. "Lady Augusta, of course, the library." She guided him from the ballroom, aware of Alexander's watchful gaze as they departed. The library, blessedly empty, offered a quiet retreat from the festivities. Augusta released Blackwood's arm once the door closed behind them. "You should sit, my lord. You seem unwell." Blackwood laughed bitterly. "Unwell? Perhaps, though drunk would be more accurate." He stumbled to a leather armchair, collapsing into it with little grace. "Forgive me, Lady Augusta. I am not at my best this evening." "So I observe," she replied coolly. "May I ask what prompts such behavior?" He studied her through bloodshot eyes. "You truly don't know, do you?" "How extraordinary." "Know what?" "That you are in grave danger," he said, his voice suddenly clear despite his apparent intoxication. "That Alexander Cavendish is not the man you believe him to be." Augusta sighed. "Lord Blackwood, if you have summoned me here merely to repeat tired rumors—" "Not rumors," he interrupted fiercely. "Truth. Caroline Cavendish did not take her own life. She was murdered." A chill ran down Augusta's spine. "That is a serious accusation, sir." "One I can prove," Blackwood insisted. "I have seen the letters Caroline wrote before her death, not just to her family, but to my father. They speak of fear, yes, but also of evidence she had discovered. Evidence of the Duke's involvement in my uncle's death 5 years ago." Augusta struggled to maintain her composure. "Your uncle?" "The previous Earl of Blackwood," he explained. "Officially, he died of heart failure. In reality, he was ruined by Alexander Cavendish's financial manipulations, driven to despair. And then, when he threatened exposure, silenced permanently." "This is absurd," Augusta said, though doubt had begun to creep into her mind. "Why would the Duke target your uncle?" "For the same reason he targets anyone who stands in his way," Blackwood replied bitterly. "Power, control. The Blackwood estates bordered Shadowmere to the east. My uncle refused to sell certain parcels Cavendish wanted for expansion, a mistake that cost him everything." Before she could respond, the library door opened and Alexander entered, his expression thunderous as he surveyed the scene. "Blackwood," he said, his voice dangerously soft, "I believe it's time you departed." The younger man rose, straightening his waistcoat with exaggerated care. "I was just leaving, Your Grace. Lady Augusta and I have had a most illuminating conversation. Indeed. Alexander's gaze flickered to Augusta's face. How fascinating. Blackwood moved toward the door, pausing as he drew level with the Duke. She deserves to know the truth, Cavendish. About everything. Get out, Alexander replied evenly. While you still can. Something like fear flashed in Blackwood's eyes, quickly masked by bravado. With a final bow to Augusta, he departed, leaving a tense silence in his wake. Alexander closed the library door, leaning against it for a moment before turning to Augusta. I apologize for the interruption. Blackwood has always lacked discretion, particularly when in his cups. He seemed remarkably coherent for a man supposedly in his cups, Augusta observed. Alexander's expression sharpened. What did he say to you? Augusta hesitated, torn between loyalty to Alexander and the disturbing seeds of doubt Blackwood had planted. He made accusations about Caroline's death, about your business dealings with his uncle. I see. Alexander moved to the fireplace, staring into the flames for a long moment. And do you believe him? I don't know what to believe, Augusta admitted. Every person in this house seems to have a different version of the truth. Lady Preston hints at dark secrets. Lord Blackwood alleges murder, and you... She faltered. And I? He prompted. You reveal only what you must. When you must, she said softly, always holding something in reserve. He turned to face her, his expression more vulnerable than she had ever seen it. Would complete honesty serve either of us well, Augusta? Would you truly wish to know every shadow in my past, every compromise I have made to protect what is mine? She met his gaze steadily. I would rather know an uncomfortable truth than believe a comforting lie. Alexander moved toward her slowly, stopping when only a few feet separated them. Then here is truth, unvarnished. I did not kill Caroline, nor did I drive her to take her own life, but I failed her nonetheless. I saw her suffering and believed it temporary, treatable. I was wrong. And Lord Blackwood's uncle? Frederick Blackwood ruined himself through gambling and poor investments, Alexander said flatly. I offered to purchase his lands at fair market value before his creditors seized them. He refused out of pride, then accused me of orchestrating his downfall when those same creditors foreclosed. He died of heart failure after a particularly violent argument with his nephew, the very man who now accuses me of murder. Augusta studied his face, searching for signs of deception, but finding only weary honesty. Why would Lord Blackwood lie about such things? Because the truth implicates him, Alexander replied. Richard Blackwood inherited estates heavily encumbered by his uncle's debts. Most of those debts were held by Sir William Preston's bank. Preston agreed to restructure the loans on favorable terms in exchange for Blackwood's assistance in certain matters. Matters concerning you? And now it seems concerning you as well. Alexander closed the remaining distance between them, taking her hands in his. Augusta, I have not been entirely forthcoming about why I approached you that night at the Pembrokes' ball. Her heart quickened at his touch. I had assumed it was mere chance. Nothing in my life happens by chance, he said quietly. I sought you out because I had received information that Blackwood intended to court you, not for your charms, considerable though they are, but because of Hadley Manor's strategic position. Strategic? Your estate sits between Shadowmere and the railway line being constructed to Southampton, Alexander explained. Control of Hadley would allow access to that railway, access that would increase the value of surrounding properties enormously. And you believe Lord Blackwood intended to gain that control through marriage to me? The idea was both insulting and alarmingly plausible. I believe Blackwood acts as Preston's agent in this, yes, Alexander confirmed. When I appeared to develop an interest in you myself, their plans required adjustment. Hence the threatening note, intended to frighten you away from me. The revelation left Augusta momentarily speechless. Everything, their meeting, his attention, the danger that now surrounded her, all stemmed from a cold calculation of property and advantage. If this is all about property and railway access, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, why not simply tell me from the beginning? Why the elaborate charade of social calls and charity committees? Because, he said, his voice low and unexpectedly gentle, what began as strategic intervention became something I neither expected nor planned for. Augusta withdrew her hands from his, needing space to think. And what was that? Genuine regard, he replied simply. Admiration. A connection I have not felt since... Perhaps ever. Before Augusta could respond to this startling admission, a sharp knock at the library door interrupted the moment. Alexander stepped back, his expression closing like a shutter as Eleanor entered, her face pale with concern. "Alexander, Augusta, forgive the intrusion, but there's been an incident. Lady Preston has collapsed in the ballroom." "What happened?" Alexander demanded, immediately alert. "Doctor?" "Bennett is attending her now," Eleanor explained hurriedly. "She complained of dizziness, then fainted. There's a speculation that her champagne may have been tampered with." Augusta felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. "Tampered?" Eleanor nodded grimly. "Bennett believes she may have been poisoned." "Was anyone seen near her drink?" Alexander asked sharply. "Several people, apparently," Eleanor replied. "The ballroom is crowded after all." "But—" She hesitated, glancing anxiously at Augusta. "But what?" Alexander pressed. "Lord Everley claims he saw Augusta speaking with Lady Preston shortly before the incident, and apparently several guests noticed Augusta bringing Lord Blackwood to the library just minutes later." Alexander's expression darkened. "Implying what exactly?" Eleanor wrung her hands. "There are whispers, Alexander, suggestions that perhaps Augusta had reason to silence Henrietta after their conversation, and that she might have enlisted Blackwood's help." "That's preposterous," Augusta exclaimed. "Lady Preston was perfectly well when I left her." "Of course it's absurd," Alexander agreed, his voice cold with anger. "Where is Everley now?" "With Sir William," Eleanor said. "He arrived unexpectedly just after Henrietta collapsed. They're both with Bennett in the blue drawing room." Alexander turned to Augusta, his expression grave. "This is no coincidence. Preston's sudden return, Everley's accusations, Henrietta's mysterious illness. It's all connected." "Connected to what?" Augusta asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. "To us," he replied simply. "To whatever is developing between us. Someone is determined to prevent it, by discrediting you, frightening you away, or worse." Eleanor looked between them, comprehension dawning on her face. "Alexander, you don't think—" "I think," he interrupted, "that we need to speak with Preston and Everley immediately. Eleanor, please return to the ballroom. Assure our guests that Lady Preston is receiving the best care and that the evening will continue as planned." As Eleanor departed, Alexander turned back to Augusta. "You should return to the ballroom as well. The last thing we need is for you to appear to be hiding." Augusta lifted her chin. "I prefer to accompany you. If I'm being accused, even obliquely, I have the right to confront my accusers." A flash of admiration crossed his face. "Very well, but stay close to me and say nothing unless directly addressed. Preston is dangerous when cornered." Together they made their way through the mansion's corridors to the blue drawing room. Inside they found Sir William Preston pacing before the fireplace, his florid face mottled with rage or concern, perhaps both. Lord Everley stood by the window, while Dr. Bennett examined a pale, semi-conscious Henrietta on a chaise longue. "Cavendish," Preston snarled as they entered. "What the devil is happening in your house? My wife has been poisoned." "We don't know that for certain," Bennett interjected, looking up from his patient. "Lady Preston's symptoms could indicate several conditions." "She was perfectly well until she drank that champagne," Everley insisted. "Champagne served at your instruction, Cavendish." Alexander's expression remained impassive. "Champagne served to over 300 guests, none of whom have reported illness. A curious poison that affects only one person, wouldn't you say?" Preston's gaze shifted to Augusta, his eyes narrowing. "Perhaps not the champagne itself, but what was added to it. I understand Lady Augusta was seen speaking with my wife shortly before she collapsed." Augusta stepped forward, ignoring Alexander's warning glance. "As were dozens of other guests, Sir William. Lady Preston and I exchanged brief pleasantries, nothing more. And then you hurried off to a private meeting with Blackwood," Everley added silkily. "Most curious timing." "Lord Blackwood was causing a disturbance," Augusta replied evenly. "I merely removed him from the ballroom to prevent embarrassment. The Duke joined us moments later." "A convenient explanation," Preston muttered. Alexander moved to stand beside Augusta, his presence solid and reassuring. "Sir William, your insinuations border on slander. Lady Augusta is above reproach, as anyone who knows her can attest." "And how well do you know her, Cavendish?" Preston challenged. "You met barely a month ago, yet suddenly she co-hosts your events. visits your home unchaperoned, and appears to have remarkable influence over you. One might wonder what hold she has established so quickly. Augusta felt heat rise to her cheeks at the implied impropriety, but before she could respond, Dr. Bennet rose from Henrietta's side. "This accomplishes nothing," he said firmly. "Lady Preston needs rest and quiet. Whatever the cause of her indisposition, this interrogation serves only to delay proper treatment." "And what is your diagnosis, Doctor?" Preston demanded. Bennet hesitated, glancing at Alexander. "I cannot be certain without further examination, but her symptoms suggest possible belladonna poisoning. Dilated pupils, dry mouth, elevated pulse. Fortunately, the dose appears to have been small. With proper care, she should recover fully." "Belladonna," Everly repeated meaningfully. "A plant commonly found in English gardens, including perhaps the conservatory of this very house?" Alexander's jaw tightened. "If you have an accusation to make, Everly, make it plainly." "I merely observed that the means were readily available," the Earl replied with false innocence, "and that certain parties might benefit from Lady Preston's incapacitation." "Enough," Bennet interrupted. "Lady Preston requires quiet. I suggest she be moved to a bedchamber where she can rest undisturbed." Alexander nodded. "Of course. Eleanor's room is nearest. Sir William, you are welcome to remain with your wife. The rest of us should return to the ballroom before our absence generates further speculation." "I'm not leaving, Henrietta," Preston declared. "Nor would I expect you to," Alexander replied coldly. "Bennet, please see to Lady Preston's comfort. Everly, I believe your duties as escort are concluded for the evening." The Earl bristled at the dismissal, but could find no reasonable grounds for objection. With a stiff bow to Augusta and a meaningful glance at Preston, he departed. Once Henrietta had been moved to Eleanor's chamber with Preston and Bennet in attendance, Alexander led Augusta to a small anteroom adjacent to the ballroom. "This is no coincidence," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Preston was supposedly in Manchester. His sudden return, Henrietta's mysterious illness, it's all calculated to create scandal, to link your name to something unsavory." "But why?" Augusta asked, bewildered by the lengths to which someone would go to separate her from Alexander. "Surely there are simpler ways to prevent a railway connection across my land?" Alexander's expression grew troubled. "I fear this may no longer be merely about property and railways. Preston has harbored resentment against me for years, dating back to a business venture in which he felt cheated. Henrietta's grievance is more personal, as I explained. If they believe I have developed genuine feelings for you, they would seek to destroy what they cannot have," Augusta finished, the realization chilling her. "Not just my reputation, but any chance of happiness between us." "Yes," he agreed, his grey eyes dark with concern. "The question is how far they are willing to go. Poisoning Henrietta herself to cast suspicion on you suggests a disturbing commitment to their cause." Augusta considered this. "But surely Lady Preston wouldn't willingly ingest poison, even at her husband's instruction." "Perhaps she didn't know," Alexander suggested. "A small amount of belladonna in her toilette, absorbed through the skin rather than ingested, would produce similar symptoms without her knowledge or consent. The calculation required for such a scheme was horrifying to contemplate. These are not merely business rivals, Alexander. These are dangerous enemies." "Yes," he agreed grimly. "Which is why you must leave London. Tonight." Augusta stared at him in shock. "Leave? Now?" "Return to Hadley Manor at first light," he insisted. "Preston and his allies cannot touch you there, on your own land, surrounded by loyal servants." "And what of you?" she demanded. "Am I to flee while you remain to face these accusations alone?" "I have weathered worse storms," he replied. "Once the immediate scandal subsides, I will join you at Hadley." "There are matters between us that remain unresolved, Augusta. Matters that deserve to be addressed away from prying eyes and malicious tongues." The intensity of his gaze left no doubt as to his meaning. Augusta felt her heart quicken, but practical concerns intruded on the moment. "My reputation may already be compromised," she pointed out. "Leaving suddenly will only appear to confirm my guilt." "Your cousin will accompany you," Alexander countered. "They planned return to Hampshire for family matters. Eleanor will ensure the proper story circulates." Augusta could see the logic in his plan, yet something in her rebelled at the thought of retreat. I dislike running from false accusations. It is not retreat, he said firmly. It is strategic repositioning. At Hadley you hold the advantage. Preston and his allies will be forced to approach on your terms if they dare approach at all. Before Augusta could respond, the anteroom door opened and Eleanor appeared, her face drawn with concern. Alexander, Augusta, you must come quickly. It's Lord Blackwood. He's been found unconscious in the garden. And there's a note that mentions Augusta. Alexander's expression hardened. What does it say? The widow danced with death. Now death claims another. Eleanor's voice trembled as she recited the ominous words. It was pinned to his coat. Alexander, what does it mean? It means, he replied grimly, that our enemies have grown bolder than I anticipated. Augusta, stay with Eleanor. I must see Blackwood myself. I'm coming with you, Augusta insisted. If my name is being used in this foul business, I have a right to know the truth of it. After a moment's hesitation, Alexander nodded. Very well. Eleanor, return to our guests. Say only that Lord Blackwood has taken ill and is being attended to. Nothing more. The garden, illuminated by strategically placed lanterns for the evening's festivities, held an eerie quality as they made their way along the gravel paths. Several footmen stood in a tight circle near the conservatory entrance, their faces grave in the flickering light. Stand aside, Alexander commanded, and the men parted to reveal Lord Blackwood sprawled on the ground, his evening clothes dishevelled, a thin trickle of blood running from his temple. Doctor. Bennett knelt beside him, checking his pulse. How is he? Alexander asked tersely. Bennett looked up, his expression troubled. Alive, but deeply unconscious. He's been struck on the head, deliberately, I'd say, given the nature of the wound. And this? Alexander indicated a folded paper clutched in one of the footman's hands. Found pinned to his lordship's coat, Your Grace, the servant explained, handing over the note. Alexander read it, his jaw tightening, then passed it to Augusta. The message, composed of cut newspaper letters like the previous threat, was exactly as Eleanor had reported. Who found him? Augusta asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. I did, Your Grace, replied one of the younger footmen. I was checking the garden lanterns when I saw someone lying near the path. Thought he might be a guest who'd had too much champagne, but when I approached... Did you see anyone else in the garden? Alexander pressed. The footman shook his head. No, Your Grace. Though I heard the garden gate close just as I was coming around the hedgerow, thought nothing of it at the time. Alexander turned to Bennett. Can he be moved? Carefully, the physician replied. He should be taken inside, but not disturbed by the general company. A quiet room where I can examine him properly. The study, Alexander decided. You men carry him gently. Bennett, see to his injuries. I need to know the moment he regains consciousness. As the footman carefully lifted Blackwood's limp form, Alexander drew Augusta aside. This changes everything. Blackwood was not meant to be a victim. He's been working with Preston all along. Perhaps he outlived his usefulness, Augusta suggested, or threatened to expose their plans. Alexander considered this. Possibly. Either way, this attack, so close to Henrietta's poisoning, is clearly meant to implicate us further. The note makes that explicit. Us, Augusta repeated. Not me alone? Death claims another, Alexander quoted grimly. The implication being that you were responsible for Henrietta, and now Blackwood has fallen victim to the same hand, or to mine, acting in your defense. The calculated malice behind such a scheme made Augusta feel physically ill. These are not the actions of mere business rivals, Alexander. This is something more personal, more vindictive. Yes, he agreed, his expression darkening. Which makes my earlier advice even more urgent. You must leave London tonight, not tomorrow. I'll make arrangements immediately. And leave you to face these accusations alone? I will not. Alexander took her hands, his grip almost painful in its intensity. Augusta, listen to me. Preston is capable of far worse than false accusations and staged accidents. If he truly believes you stand between him and his goals, whether those goals involve me, your land, or something else entirely, he will not hesitate to eliminate that obstacle permanently. The stark warning sent a chill through her. And what of you? Are you not equally at risk? Preston and I have been engaged in this dance for years, he replied. We understand each other's limits. You, however, are a new factor, one he has not yet measured fully. That makes you unpredictable to him, and therefore dangerous. Augusta recognized the logic in his argument, but her heart rebelled at the thought of abandoning him amidst growing scandal. If I leave now, it will appear as admission of guilt. If you stay, he countered, you may not have the opportunity to prove your innocence. Augusta, please, for once, set aside your courage and consider your safety. The rare plea, delivered with such evident concern, weakened her resolve. Very well, she conceded reluctantly. But I will not go to Hadley. It's too remote, and word of these events will reach Hampshire eventually. I have a small property in Derbyshire, inherited from my mother. Few know of its existence. I will go there instead. Relief softened Alexander's features. A wise choice. I'll arrange for a private coach to take you and your maid. Catherine must remain here to counter any suggestion that your departure was precipitous or suspicious. She will not like that, Augusta observed. She will comply when she understands the stakes, he replied confidently. Now we must return to the ballroom separately to avoid further gossip. Continue, as though nothing is amiss while I make the necessary arrangements. As they approached the house, Alexander paused, turning to Augusta with an expression of such intensity that it took her breath away. When this is resolved, and it will be resolved, there are matters between us that require addressing, matters of considerable importance to me. The implication was clear, and despite the danger surrounding them, Augusta felt a flutter of anticipation. To me as well, she admitted softly. His eyes held hers for a long moment, conveying feelings too complex for words. Then, with visible effort, he schooled his features back to the impassive mask of the Duke of Shadowmere. "Until Derbyshire, then," he said formally, though his eyes still burned with unspoken promise. "Until Derbyshire," she echoed, wondering if they were sealing a pact or a fate. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of forced smiles and mechanical conversation. Augusta moved through the glittering crowd like a sleepwalker, her mind occupied with preparations for her imminent departure and concern for the unconscious Blackwood. By midnight, most guests had departed, unaware of the drama unfolding beneath the evening's elegant surface. Only the hospital committee members remained, gathered in the smaller drawing room, for a final tally of the funds raised. "Over £1,500, Eleanor announced triumphantly, her eyes bright despite the strain of the evening. A remarkable success by any measure. As the meeting concluded, Eleanor approached Augusta with a forced smile. "Alexander asks if you would join him in the library. There are some final matters regarding the fundraiser that require your attention." Augusta understood the pretext. "Of course. Please extend my congratulations to the committee for tonight's success." The library, dimly lit by a single lamp and the dying fire, held a somber atmosphere as Augusta entered. Alexander stood by the window, his tall figure silhouetted against the night sky. He turned at her approach, his face grave in the shadowed light. "Everything is arranged," he said without preamble. "A closed carriage will collect you from Catherine's townhouse at 4 o'clock. Your maid has been instructed to pack only essentials. The fewer who know of your departure, the better." Augusta nodded, a sudden weight of finality settling over her. "And Catherine?" "I've spoken with her. She understands the necessity, though she's not pleased." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Your cousin is a formidable woman when provoked." "She is protective," Augusta agreed. "As it seems, are you?" Alexander moved closer, the lamplight casting his features in sharp relief, the strong jaw, the penetrating eyes, the mouth that could be both stern and unexpectedly gentle. "I protect what matters to me, Augusta. What I value, what I—" He trailed off, but the unspoken word hung in the air between them, too significant to be voiced in haste or under duress. "This separation need not be long," he continued after a moment. "A week, perhaps 2, until the immediate scandal subsides, and I can identify who orchestrated tonight's events. Then I will come to you in Derbyshire." "And if you cannot identify the culprit?" Augusta asked. "I will," he stated with quiet confidence. "Preston is clever, but not infallible. He has already overplayed his hand tonight, first with Henrietta's poisoning, then with Blackwood. Desperation makes men careless." Alexander reached into his waistcoat pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. "Before you go, I have something for you." Augusta accepted the pouch, surprised by its weight. Inside she found an exquisite gold locket on a delicate chain. The locket's face was engraved with intertwined roses, their stems forming an elegant knot. "It's beautiful," she murmured, touched by the unexpected gift. "Open it," he urged softly. The locket contained a small folded paper rather than the customary portrait or lock of hair. Augusta carefully extracted it, unfolding a tiny note written in Alexander's bold hand. "Where shadows end, light begins. Trust in that light, as I have learned to trust in you." The simple message brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "Alexander." "Wear it," he said, taking the locket from her trembling fingers and moving behind her to fasten it around her neck, not merely as remembrance but as promise. The weight of the locket settled against her skin, warm and somehow reassuring. When Alexander's hands lingered at her nape, Augusta turned to face him, suddenly unwilling to leave with so much still unspoken between them. "Alexander," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "when this is over, when we meet again in Derbyshire, what then?" His eyes held hers, all pretense and reserve stripped away. "Then, Augusta Blackwell, I intend to ask you a question I never thought to ask any woman again. A question that frightens me far more than any business rival or social scandal." Her heart quickened at the implication. "And if my answer is yes, then," he said simply, "the shadows that have defined my existence these past years will finally give way to light." The raw honesty in his voice, the vulnerability beneath the strength, undid her final reservations. Augusta reached up, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw with wondering tenderness. "I find," she whispered, "that I am suddenly impatient for Derbyshire." Something fierce and joyful flared in his eyes. With deliberate slowness he bent his head until his lips hovered a breath away from hers. "As am I." The kiss, when it came, was gentle yet profound, a sealing of promises unspoken, a bridge across the separation to come. Augusta surrendered to it completely, her hands finding their way to his shoulders as his arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer with careful reverence. When they finally parted, Alexander pressed his forehead to hers, his breathing unsteady. "Now go," he said roughly, "before I forget all propriety and reason." Augusta stepped back reluctantly, her fingers touching the locket at her throat. "Until Derbyshire," she said, the words no longer a mere farewell but a vow. "Until Derbyshire," he echoed, the simple phrase carrying the weight of future and hope. The gold locket had become a talisman for Augusta during the long weeks of separation. As autumn painted the Derbyshire hills in russet and gold, she would find herself absently touching the pendant, drawing comfort from the weight of Alexander's promise against her skin. "Where shadows end, light begins," words that had sustained her through days of uncertainty and nights of longing. 3 months had passed since her hasty departure from London in the pre-dawn hours following the charity ball. 3 months of correspondence carried by trusted messengers, of carefully worded letters that spoke of progress and patience. Alexander's investigations had taken longer than anticipated, the web of intrigue surrounding Preston's schemes proving more complex than either had imagined. But his last letter, received 2 days prior, had contained news worth the wait. "My dearest Augusta, justice, long delayed, has finally been served. Preston faces ruin and disgrace, his schemes exposed through his own carelessness and the testimony of unexpected allies. Blackwood, upon regaining consciousness, proved surprisingly honorable when confronted with the full extent of Preston's manipulations. It seems he was as much pawn as conspirator, drawn into Preston's orbit through financial necessity rather than genuine malice. The evidence Preston had concealed, letters proving his deliberate sabotage of business rivals, including your late husband's shipping ventures, has been presented to the appropriate authorities. He will face charges of fraud and criminal conspiracy, charges from which even his considerable connections cannot shield him. With these matters resolved, I find there remains but one piece of unfinished business demanding my attention. I ride for Derbyshire on Wednesday, weather permitting, and hope to reach Rosewood by week's end. Until then I remain yours in earnest anticipation, Alexander. Today was Saturday. If Alexander's journey had proceeded as planned, he might arrive at any moment, a prospect that filled Augusta with equal parts joy and trepidation. For while their letters had maintained the connection forged during those turbulent weeks in London, 3 months was ample time for hearts to cool, for priorities to shift, for promises to lose their urgency. Augusta stood at the window of the small drawing room in Rosewood Cottage, her mother's childhood home that had proven the perfect sanctuary, remote enough for safety, yet close enough to civilization for necessary comforts. Behind her, a cheerful fire crackled in the grate, warding off the October chill. A book lay abandoned on the nearby table, her morning tea grown cold beside it. For Augusta found herself increasingly distracted, her attention drawn inevitably to the road that wound through the valley below, the road from London. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention. A rider appeared on the road below, moving at a steady pace toward the cottage. Even at this distance, Augusta recognized the straight-backed posture, the confident handling of the magnificent black stallion. Her heart leaped to her throat as she pressed a hand to the window, as though reaching across the remaining distance between them. "Wilson!" she called, her voice uncharacteristically breathless. "A visitor approaches. Please prepare refreshments in the drawing room." Her lady's maid appeared in the doorway, a knowing smile on her weathered face. "Already done, Your Grace, and I've had fresh water brought up for you to refresh yourself should you wish it." Augusta smoothed her hands over her sage green morning dress, simple by London standards but well suited to country life. "Thank you, Wilson. That will be all for now." Alone once more, Augusta touched the gold locket that had not left her throat since that night in the Shadowmere Library. Inside, Alexander's note had been joined by a pressed wildflower from the Derbyshire hills, a tangible reminder of the light he had promised would follow shadow. The cottage's small entrance hall echoed with the sound of the door knocker. Augusta moved to the drawing-room doorway, listening as Wilson admitted their visitor. Then footsteps in the hall, confident, measured, familiar. Alexander Cavendish stood framed in the doorway, his tall figure silhouetted against the light from the entrance hall. He was dressed for riding in a dark coat and buckskins, his cravat loosened from the journey. But it was his face that captured Augusta's attention. The strong features relaxed in a way she had rarely seen in London, the grey eyes warm with an emotion that made her breath catch. "Lady Augusta," he said, his deep voice washing over her like a physical caress. "Your Grace," she replied, fighting to maintain composure when her heart threatened to burst from her chest. For a moment, they regarded each other in silence, measuring the changes wrought by separation. Then Alexander stepped into the room, closing the distance between them with deliberate strides. "I find," he said quietly, "that 3 months is an intolerably long time." "Interminable," Augusta agreed, a smile tugging at her lips despite her effort at dignity. Another step brought him close enough that she could detect the scent of leather and wood smoke that clung to his clothing, could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, lines that deepened as he returned her smile. "You look well," he observed. "Derbyshire agrees with you. I have found peace here," she admitted, though not perhaps complete contentment. His eyebrow arched in silent question. "Contentment requires something more," Augusta explained, bold in a way she would never have been before London, before him. "Something I have been awaiting with considerable impatience." Understanding flared in his eyes, followed by a heat that quickened her pulse. "I believe," he said carefully, "I mentioned unfinished business in my letter." "You did," she confirmed. "Business of a significant nature, as I recall." Alexander reached for her hand, his touch sending a current of awareness through her. "May we sit? What I have to say deserves proper attention." Augusta allowed him to lead her to the small settee before the fire. Once seated, however, he seemed uncharacteristically hesitant, his customary confidence giving way to a vulnerability she had glimpsed only rarely. "I practiced this speech 100 times on the journey from London," he confessed with a rueful smile. "Yet now I find all my careful phrases inadequate." "Perhaps simplicity would serve better than eloquence," Augusta suggested gently. Alexander's eyes met hers, direct and unflinching. "Very well. Simplicity, then." He took a breath, his hand tightening around hers. "I love you, Augusta Blackwell. I believe I began to love you the moment you entered the Pembrokes ballroom, though I was too stubborn or too blind to recognize it immediately." The declaration, delivered with such straightforward honesty, stole Augusta's breath. Though she had hoped, had perhaps even expected such feelings, hearing them voiced with such clarity was overwhelming. Our beginning was complicated by ulterior motives and external threats, Alexander continued, but what grew between us transcended those complications. In London, surrounded by danger and uncertainty, I discovered something I had thought lost to me forever: the capacity for trust, for hope, for love. He released her hand only to reach into his waistcoat pocket, withdrawing a small box of burgundy velvet. I come to you now without pretense or strategic purpose. I come simply as a man who has found his equal, his partner, his light after long darkness. Opening the box, he revealed a ring of exquisite craftsmanship, a central sapphire flanked by diamonds set in intricate gold filigree. "Augusta Blackwell," Alexander said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes, "would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not for land or title or advantage, but for the simple, profound reason that I cannot imagine my future without you in it." Augusta looked from the ring to the man offering it, this complex, commanding man who had entered her life like a storm, yet now gazed at her with such vulnerable hope. In that moment, all doubts, all lingering questions dissolved like morning mist before the sun. "Yes," she said simply, her voice strong and clear despite the tears that threatened. "Yes, Alexander, I will marry you." Joy transformed his features, erasing years of care and shadow as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Then he was drawing her into his arms, his kiss a seal upon their promise, tender at first, then deepening with the passion they had held in check for so long. When they finally parted, Alexander kept her close, his forehead pressed to hers in a gesture that had become uniquely theirs. "I had thought to suggest a lengthy engagement," he murmured. "Time for society to adjust to the idea of the notorious Duke of Shadowmere taking a new duchess." Augusta smiled against his lips. "And what do you suggest now?" "Now?" His grey eyes gleamed with a happiness she had never seen in them before. "Now I find myself unwilling to wait a day longer than necessary. Christmas at Shadowmere, perhaps. A small ceremony, with only those we truly trust in attendance." "Christmas," Augusta agreed, her heart full to overflowing. "A fitting time for new beginnings." The wedding of Alexander Cavendish, Duke of Shadowmere, to Lady Augusta Blackwell took place on Christmas Eve at the chapel on the Shadowmere estate. Snow had fallen the night before, transforming the grounds into a glistening wonderland that seemed to reflect the joy of the occasion. Only a small gathering of trusted friends witnessed the ceremony: Lord and Lady Harrington, Dr. Bennet, Catherine and her husband, and a radiant Eleanor, whose health had improved markedly during her stay in Kent. To everyone's surprise, Lord Blackwood was also in attendance, his reconciliation with the Duke one of the more unexpected outcomes of the Preston affair. Augusta wore a gown of ivory silk embroidered with silver thread, her dark hair adorned with a coronet of white roses and holly berries. Alexander, resplendent in formal attire, watched her approach the altar with undisguised wonder, as though still amazed by the turn his life had taken. The service was simple, but deeply moving, the ancient vows exchanged with clear voices and unwavering commitment. When Alexander placed the wedding band beside the sapphire engagement ring on Augusta's finger, his hands were steady, his eyes alight with a happiness few had ever witnessed in the once forbidding Duke of Shadowmere. As they emerged from the chapel into the winter sunshine, their guests showering them with rose petals and good wishes, Augusta looked up at her husband with a heart too full for words. Alexander returned her gaze with equal emotion, his hand warm and secure around hers. "Happy, Your Grace," he murmured, using her new title with evident pleasure. "Completely," Augusta replied, squeezing his hand. "Though I believe true happiness is not a destination reached, but a journey shared." Alexander's smile deepened, his grey eyes bright with promise. "Then let us begin that journey together, my love, step by step, day by day, from this moment forward." And as they walked through the snow toward Shadowmere House, where a Christmas feast awaited the wedding party, Augusta knew with absolute certainty that the trembling widow who had entered that grand ball months ago had found not just a new life, but a love worth every risk, every challenge, every moment of doubt and danger that had led to this perfect day. For sometimes, the most unexpected waltz leads to the most extraordinary journey, and the most feared duke proves to be the most beloved husband of all. The end. Dear listener, Tonight's story was not just about a widow and a feared duke. It was about second chances, about finding light after long years in the dark, about daring to love again, even when the heart is tired, wounded, or afraid. And perhaps, in your own way, you've lived through something similar: loss, loneliness, betrayal, change that came too fast, or not fast enough. But if this story reminds us of anything, it's this: life does not end when things fall apart. Sometimes that's when it finally begins again. It doesn't matter how old we are. It's never too late to be surprised by kindness. Never too late to feel seen or cherished or understood. And it's never too late to be deeply loved. So as you lay down tonight, know that your journey still holds meaning. Your heart still has chapters left to write. You are not alone. You are not forgotten. And you are held by stories, by memories, and by the quiet strength that lives in you. May you sleep peacefully. May your body rest. And may your soul feel protected, cradled gently by something bigger than fear. With all our warmth and gratitude from Legends of the Fall, thank you for staying with us until the end. If this story touched your heart, we kindly invite you to subscribe, like, comment, and share it with someone you care about. Your support, truly from the bottom of our hearts, helps us feel motivated to keep telling these deeply emotional stories, full of love, redemption, and unexpected twists that move us all. And remember, at the very end of this video, you'll see a suggested story from our channel. Click it, and let yourself be surprised by another heartfelt journey just like this one. With gratitude and affection, Legends of the Fall team.